Hello there. My name's Dan. I'm a Warhammer veteran. It's a weird thing to say. Anyway, this video I'm going to talk about 3 things that I think are require a bit of clarification or fixing in Warhammer the Old World. I'm actually in Manchester today. It's early in the morning. I've woken up and can't go back to sleep, so I thought I'd record this quick video. I'm in this flat that's weirdly really nice, sort of, overlooking the uni, so, you know, that's pretty cool. Don't have far to go. I'm here for an exam. I've got a strongman comp tomorrow, so everything's happening at the moment, so I'm out on the road. However, the flat's really weird because, like, the central heating doesn't work, and there's like these little oil-fired heaters. There's not very many of them, and they don't really kick out a lot of warmth, if I'm being honest. But also, there's no plug sockets. Well, there's hardly any plug sockets in this like massive living space, so it's very odd. Anyway, yeah. So the 3 things I want to talk about: drilled, which I think might be overpowered. Again, rules as written. There's a lot of people who've read that and they're like, oh, well, that's not what they meant, so that's not how I'm playing it. But it's like, rules as written, and I'll talk through those in a sec. Then there's 2 spells that I think are particularly problematic. One of those is Steed of Shadows, which is in the demonology lore, and what that allows you to do is give a unit fly 12. So if that unit is in a marching column, it can move 36 inches and fly. And because of how you measure columns in terms of their movement, you measure the movement of the front rank. But a marching column, obviously, you know, the people at the back move a lot more than the guys at the front. So actually, wheels don't take up that much move. So that's just insanely it's too good. I'd be in favour of Steed of Shadows being like, I don't know, a 15-inch teleport or something like that. Or maybe a 12-inch teleport, you know. At the end of the... Or maybe the unit gets to make a single 12-inch flying move as a reserve move or something. But anyway, 12-inch fly is just way too powerful. So I am going to be exploiting that in tournaments, and I did want to show that off. Well, as long as they haven't fixed it by the time I get to a tournament. And also, because the other thing is, you know, 36 inches, that's like, if you're casting that on a unit of it, so it can only be cast on a unit of infantry, which is useful to remember. But you can cast it on a unit of like drilled, well, like I did on a unit of drilled chosen. They can then essentially get to the other side of the table, and you know, I think that's the thing that's broken about the old world at the moment. So apologies, Dave, but I use it against Dave just to sort of show off something that is very ridiculous. There's another spell called Spectral Doppelganger, which I've seen used quite a bit and in battle reports, where the casting wizard gets 2d6 hits. It's an assailment, so every combat phase gets 2d6 hits using any of its weapon profiles. So, for instance, you could give an Empire Wizard the Mace of Hellstorm, and it casts Spectral Doppelganger and gets 2d6 hits, doesn't have to roll to hit. And the Mace of Hellstorm is Strength 10, AP, I don't know, 3 or 4, something like that. D6 multiple damage. So that will kill literally anything. you know, on the table. That spell and that magic item, essentially, somehow, you know, I think our spell needs changing. So it's Spectral Doppelganger. The enemy unit suffers 2d6 hits at the caster's strength with an AP of, I don't know, 2, let's say, or 1 maybe. Or maybe with Armor Bane 2 or something like that. It does need toning down a bit because there are some, you know, Keeper of Secrets, for instance, 2d6 strength 5 AP 2 hits with like Armor Bane 2, I think, as well. You know, and it also comfort, like, so for instance, if you've got a wizard that's somehow given itself Killing Blow, you know, that's 2d6 hits. It just needs 1/6 out of those. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So it needs toning down, I think. All the other spells seem pretty reasonable, to be honest. There's nothing that's you know, massively overpowered. And I suppose the other thing... So the final thing I wanted to talk about was the drilled rule. So I'll just take you through the rules. What the drilled special rule says... Firstly, it doesn't say it's firstly, but anyway, I'll deal with this first. It allows the unit that's drilled to march regardless of whether the enemy sighted rule is in place or not. So basically, if there's an enemy unit within 8 inches, you've got to take a leadership test to march. Drilled units don't have to take it; they can just march. So that's what it does first off. Secondly, it allows you to make a free redress the ranks move before moving. After making this free manoeuvre, it may move as normal. Move as normal is like the key phrase. Some people take move as normal to mean move in the remaining moves phase. Move in the remaining move subphase of the movement phase. But that's not defined as a normal move. In fact, it's not like Age of Sigmar, and I think this is where the confusion comes from, because a normal move is a thing, is like a defined term in Age of Sigmar. Not in the old world. There's no such thing as a normal move. So technically, the drilled rule can be used before making any move. So, for instance, a fall back in good order. Fleeing. Getting pushed back. You know, all of these are moves. So drilled could be used before any of these moves. I don't think that's the intent for it to be used at like the end of the combat phase, but you know, when fleeing and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't feel like the intent. However, there is historical precedence for actual troops that, because they were so highly drilled, were incredibly effective on the battlefield. So the first I'd point at is the Romans. We're not talking about Testudo. Contrary to films, Testudos take ages to set up. So it takes ages for the Romans. So Testudo is basically that little huddle where they've all got like shields on every single side, and you know, the testudo is Latin for tortoise. So that's that little sort of shell of shields that they create for themselves. That's not what I'm talking about, although that is impressive, but that does take a while to get everybody's shields in the right place. No, what I'm talking about is the Romans were quite famous for essentially being able to march in a column headlong at the enemy, very quickly close the distance, much quicker than infantry probably should be able to, because they were in a marching column effectively. So the thing is, if you're in a line of troops, maintaining that line, right, as you march across the battlefield is actually quite difficult, but you need to maintain the line, because if there's any gaps in it, people, the enemy will break through. Whereas if you're in a column, you're literally just following the person in front. So it's easier to cover lots of ground in a column than it is in a line. But you don't want a column to be going into a line in combat, because the line will quite swiftly overlap around the column and essentially overwhelm it, because it's attacking in the flanks and so on and so forth. So ideally, you want to be going into combat with your line and your opponent's line. Well, your line ideally being longer than your opponent's line, so that you can start to wrap around at the edges and gain an advantage that way. Now, what the Romans could do is they could march essentially in a column across the battlefield, and because they were so well drilled, they could very quickly form a line sort of on the go. So they'd slow down a little bit before the two lines met, but they could essentially, during a charge, basically, they could reform from a column into a line. And, similarly, Napoleon's guard, young, middle and old, were drilled to do the same thing. That's why they were so effective. So that kind of, Highlanders were pretty quick at forming squares, for instance, because they were drilled to do that. They were drilled to be cavalry killers. So there are, maybe these are all stories, I don't know, but the point is that drilled troops are incredibly effective at war. That's why we train soldiers so much. If you think about how people get recruited for an army, right? Back in medieval times, people would just be conscripted from villages, or sort of, given the king's coin, or whatever. They'd essentially be peasants, given a load of kit and given some really rudimental training, stab them with the sharp end sort of training. They would not be going around drill squares making sure they could perform tight turns and all that kind of stuff. That really came about, in England after Cromwell's New Model Army. So, Cromwell, who won the English Civil War, started to train troops properly and started to come up with this concept of, a standing trained army, rather than just randomly picking, fighting age men and giving them fighting equipment and then just hoping for the best, So so over the centuries we've got, and now, it might be years of training before a soldier's let anywhere near a combat situation. So training works to make troops really effective, and drilling troops to perform tight turns, like that kind of parade ground stuff you see nowadays. That parade ground stuff was really, really useful in the Napoleonic era, because that's how troops moved about. And so drilling people into being able to do that was massively effective. So to me, I suppose the other thing that films have ruined is that, when two ranks of, you talk to any military historian and you ask them what charging at the enemy looked like, that was more or less an intimidation tactic to try and get them to run just before the two lines met. Because normally what would happen is that, two lines of infantry would meet, they would form something like a shield wall, if not a shield wall, something fairly similar. And then the two lines would kind of just start bumping up against each other, and it would turn into a big shoving match with daggers. The Vikings had something called a seax, which is like it's like a really short punching dagger. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's not very long, and it has like it's really punchy tip, and that was basically used in the shield wall. This concept of like in Braveheart, I don't know whether you remember that film, but like where the two lines just charge into each other and form a massive mess in the middle of the battlefield. I mean, that didn't happen. I mean, largely as well because they didn't have like uniforms, so nobody really knew who was on which side. I mean, because they all dressed more or less the same. They all painted more or less the same glyphs on shields and stuff like that. So, that kind of mess in the middle would have been suicidal. You'd be killing your own troops. Like, nobody would do that. So anyway, this concept of a charge, I mean, that's not really how combat works, or worked anyway. I mean, I know it's a fantasy world, so, you do it with your imagination what you like. If that's what you imagine. I imagine troops jostling, but that charge being like a last minute kind of, we need to get into that combat now, sort of thing. Which is why I think, drilled as a rule as intended. Now, I think what they need to do is add a sentence, really, to that rule that says, may move as normal. In fact, no. In the movement phase, this unit may, before it makes a move, I think it just needs in the movement phase adding to the wording, really. Because it just feels like fleeing, and it's just too I mean, yes, not a lot of units have drilled, right? It's a bit like feigned flight. It's actually quite a rare ability. So it's not like the entirety of Warhammer the Old World is populated by drilled units. The problem is drilled units tend to be really good ones. And for, like, my Chosen, it costs 2 extra points to make them all drilled. So for a 20 man unit, it costs 40 points, which isn't a lot to add a huge amount of utility. So I'm not sure they really meant it to be as powerful as it's currently written. But again, rules as written is what we've got. So it's those 3, 2 spells and drilled, I think, are a bit problematic. I mean, I still, like, I know the jury's out on fanatics and how effective they are, and we can only really see that when we start to see some proper data coming through. But, like, fanatics might be a problem because you can't target them. And I've not seen a battle report where somebody's got... So 9's the maximum you can have. Because, in a match play list. Because in match play, you're allowed 3, maximum 3 of any one unit. And you're allowed to put 3 fanatics in a Night Goblin unit. Whether those Night Goblins are stabbers or shooters, spears or bows. It doesn't make any difference. So you're allowed 3 Night Goblin units, each which can have up to 3 fanatics. But I've not seen 9 fanatics on the table yet. And that could be like a bit of a cheat code. But, we'll see. The problem is, though, if you've got 9 fanatics on the table, like, you're going to release them and then back off a bit. So you're going to need to outshoot your opponent and, like, do goblins outshoot people. I mean, there was a comment on another video about Doom Divers being, like, rubbish. But I think they're missing the point because, like, So basically, you scatter as normal, but then you get to correct the landing by D3 in a direction of your choice. So what that means is if you've got to, if you aim 2 of these templates, you can snipe characters. You can snipe lone characters that are near units. I mean, you need to get lucky, but you can take 2 of them, and they're only 95 points. Like, most rock lobbers are sort of 80, so you're paying 15 for this extra accuracy, and they're just way more accurate because, like, it's in any direction. It's not the scatter less D3. So if you've targeted a unit here, you scattered over here, you can go D3 that way and hit something there. So, maybe, I mean, once I get my Orc and Goblin army and put this on the table, I might go, oh yeah, he's right, it's total rubbish. But I just think that it's the only weapon in the game that does that kind of corrects itself. And to be honest, like, you kind of expect the Hell Cannon to do that, because it's like, its projectiles seem sentient, like, especially in Warhammer Total War. So you kind of expected them to have, like, a little bit of a little bit of something. I mean, I'm so disappointed with Hell Cannons because it's such a great model. Like, I've painted so many Hell Cannons. Like, I haven't got any of them anymore, but I think I had like 2 or 3. And then a few people asked me to paint one for them as well. So I did loads. And they were great. Great fun to put together, despite the fact they were metal models. They were great fun to put together. But, 215 points for essentially a slightly more powerful stone thrower, which again is worth 80. That, like, can just blow up and destroy half your army. And what benefit do you get for the extra 135 points or whatever it is over a normal stone thrower? A little bit more damage, and it's okay in combat. But, like, you can't move and shoot with it, so it's just going to sit at the back of the table and probably blow up by the end of the game, because, like, you get 2 chances to misfire every turn. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not convinced it's any good for that many points. Like, if it was 110, I'd probably take 1 in my list, maybe 2, but I think probably 1, just because it's so cool. But, like, it's such a liability. Like, you can't deploy it behind your armies because it might blow up and destroy half of it. Like, it's just like D6 strength 4 AP2 hits if it, like, rolls a misfire and a 1, because the thing goes on like this massive rampage and just eats everything. But that affects every unit within like 12 inches or something, so it's ridiculous. So you've got to put it in a corner where your army isn't, basically, just in case it does that. And then, like, it's not got a trebuchet's range, so its range isn't like the entire table. And then, anyway, I've rabbited on for too long, but yeah, those are my thoughts. If you got this far in the video, just looking at my face and this weird apartment, then I hope you probably should subscribe if you've got this far, because most of my content is similarly rubbish. But if you've got any comments or any thoughts, put them in the comments. I've managed to respond to all the comments that everybody's made so far, so I will talk to you. No problem there. Might take a while. And if you like the video, I'm grateful for that. And if you didn't like the video, there's a thumbs down. Both are apparently engagement, so disliking videos is as useful for the algorithm as liking them, I'm told, although that seems a bit weird. Anyway, I'm going to probably have a shower now and read my thesis again. just to make sure I've not forgotten anything, because it is upon that which I am to be examined. So anyway, I'll catch you again soon. I might do a video. I am planning to do a video where I actually go through the rules at some stage. I might do that today, or I might do it tomorrow. I don't know. I might wait until I finish my Viva and then probably head over to the hotel in Rotherham and then probably sit down there and do it. Yesterday was a bit of a washout really, but anyway. Toodles!